One of the most common questions I get as a sporting dog veterinarian is about Dewclaws and whether we should take them off or whether we should leave them. It's interesting to me because early in my career, it was really kind of a black and white issue. Everybody just took them off of most all of the hunting breeds. And in fact, it was almost a hallmark of a poor quality breeder if a dog came in with the Dewclaws on. And so a lot of that started shifting probably about 15 to 20 years ago. And a lot of the shifting came out of Europe, where they had more stringent requirements around elective surgery. So things like dew claw removal, tail docking in some of these continental breeds, ear cropping, which we almost don't see anywhere anymore. And even it started filtering into spaying and neutering. And so a lot of dogs that were heavily influenced by European breeding still, so your Drothars, your Munsterlanders, the Spaniel breeds, we would see dogs that were coming back and forth from Europe still having their Dewclaws on. Then about 10 to 15 years ago, a sports medicine colleague wrote a very convincing paper that she felt that the dew claw was intimately tied into the wrist or the carpus of the dog, and that dew claw removal caused carpal arthritis. And it's a well-written paper, it's a well-reasoned paper, but at the end of the day, it is an opinion paper and not one based on scientific evidence. There's not been a study to show if that is true or not. The unfortunate piece of that is that a lot of people promote it as scientific evidence as though it were a peer-reviewed article and study, including some veterinary colleagues. And so there's a little bit of a misconception. We actually don't have any scientific information as to whether dew claw removal causes problems or not. And so it is something we need, but it's something that we don't have. One pushback I'd push back on that paper is that if removing the dew claws instantly led to carpal instability and arthritis, I think we'd see more of that in the sled dog world, where they routinely remove dew claws to be able to make boot placement easier. Those are dogs that run thousands of miles over the course of their lifetime, oftentimes have long careers into double digits and don't have a lot of evidence of carpal arthritis. And so I think there's probably more to the story. Along the lines of that paper, there started to be a lot of videos that would show up on social media as well, showing dogs either trying to get out of ice using their dew claws or making fast turns and that dew claw contacting the ground. And people were presenting them as evidence as to the need for dew claws. And so while it's evidence, again, it's not scientific evidence. We need to, as far as the functionality of getting out of ice, you'd have to take dogs with and without the dew claws and place them in that situation and see if one group could actually get out of the ice better than the other group. And so we have a lot of this theoretical evidence, but we don't actually have scientific evidence. And so in my personal experience, I've had dogs that have had dew claws and dogs that have had them removed. And interestingly, I've had carpal arthritis in both groups just within my own dogs. And I think that kind of mirrors what I see in the veterinary practice as well. And so I'll have dogs that have dew claws that have wrist issues, and same dogs that have dew claws removed that don't. And so it's one that I don't think we have that concrete evidence that one way either causes or prevents carpal arthritis. My opinion, at least in the hunting dog world, is that the activities we engage in are going to prone these dogs to having issues with their carpus or their wrists. And the reason for that is we're asking them to run at very high speeds on uneven terrain. They're making sharp twists and turns, and you're going to be prone to tweaking those areas. A lot of times I find that these dogs, over the course of their life, they'll actually lose range of motion in that wrist joint. And I think it's the body's mechanism of almost self-bracing, where it decreases that play in the wrist to kind of prevent those sort of issues. And so I have a number of dogs in the practice, again, my own dogs included, that start losing the mobility in the wrist, but they don't have overt pain, they don't have overt lameness. I think that their body is responding to the stresses and the activity that we're placing upon them. And so, as I've mentioned, I have dogs that have had both. And so for me, it's not a make or break decision when it comes to what a breeder is doing with the dew claws. More important to me is that they have a plan for the dew claws. And so if they decide to leave the dew claws, I want it to be for a reason. So if they say, I don't take the dew claws off because I think they're functional, these are the reasons I'm leaving the dew claws, great, I'm fine with that. If they take the dew claws off because they think that it prevents injuries, I'm fine with that as well. What I try to avoid are the breeders that don't have a plan, or on the breeders that think that they can save a couple of bucks by not having the Dewclaws removed. And so they're not doing it for a reason other than for their own profitability. And so while it's not a make or break issue for me, I do want that breeder to have a plan for the Dewclaws, because it shows me that they're evaluating nearly every step in their breeding program. And if they're making decisions about Dewclaws, which likely are going to be insignificant in the long run, it tells me that they're probably also making those sort of decisions and calculated thoughts with other steps in their breeding program. And so I'm not a pro or a con against the Dewclaws. I think it's a matter of all of the situations can be rationalized and reasoned, and I'm comfortable with that. And so it's where the impetus for making this video is that I see a lot of people on social media saying it has to be this way. We have to do it this way. And that's just not the case. We don't have that evidence. The dogs exist, and so there are these populations of dogs that we could take a look at. But in veterinary medicine, conducting those sort of studies sometimes is a lot more difficult than people think. One, the funding doesn't always exist, and then two, the time commitment to do so. And so it's one of those things that logistically, research in veterinary medicine is a little bit more difficult than it is on the human side of things. And in the current state of the world, research projects in conducting research is only going to get more difficult when that funding isn't there to support some of these things. And so it's something that someday we may have that information, because again, the dogs exist. We could look at this, but right now the practicality is we don't have that information. And so until we do, there really isn't a wrong answer. If you want to take the Dewclaws off, I fully support that. If you want to leave the Dewclaws, I fully support that. And I think that you'd have a hard time arguing one side or the other to complete accuracy.